Evening. Welcome to the WZB and to this special occasion, our 2018 WZB Distinguished Lecture on Social Science, given this year by Philippe Aghion. It's nice to see a packed house, and I can promise that you are in for a treat. I had to show in an inverted U shape, I thought. I want to give you very briefly my pet theory of the quality of lectures. So, on the x-axis with little b, we look at the sheer brilliance of authors. And on the y-axis, we have the quality of talks. So why do I propose that, so this is half theory, half casual empiricism, why do I propose that this relationship is an inverted U shape? Well, if the paper is really bad, nothing helps, right? I mean, it will not make a good talk. But you also find that at the upper end of the quality distribution, there are people who are make so important contributions, are so brilliant in what they're doing, that they never have to learn to become great communicators, because they will publish their papers anyway, and people will realize that this is fantastic stuff. So the biggest return to practice good presentations is for people in the middle. And so often, the more entertaining presentations will be presentations from people in the middle of the quality spectrum. But tonight, we have an exception, a great exception, because we have Philippe, who is one of the brightest minds we have in economics and one of the best presenters I've ever seen. So, how do we organize the evening? We now have first Helmut Bester, who was kind enough to introduce you a little to Philippe's work. And then Philippe takes over and will talk for something like up to an hour. Then we can have a few questions. And then afterwards, we have some wine and pretzels outside. Okay, Helmut.
Yes. Welcome, everybody, to today's distinguished lecture in social science. Today's lecture will be given by the economist Philippe Aghion, and you see the title no longer on the screen. It's about Rethinking Growth, a Schumpeterian perspective. This perspective goes back to the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, who in 1933 became professor at Harvard University, where also Philippe later on graduated. He popularized the idea of creative destruction in economics. Philippe is a professor at the Collège de France, the grand établissement of scientific institutions in France. He's also a professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He received his PhD in economics in 1987 at Harvard University. Thereafter, he held professorships at University College London and Harvard University. In 2001, he received the Eero Janssen Award, and in 2009, the John von Neumann Award. He's a fellow of the Econometric Society and the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences. It's a special pleasure for me to introduce Philippe Aghion, because we know each other from a time when we were both young, aspiring PhD students. In the early 90s, we regularly met at the yearly conferences on the economics of information. Information economics was an exciting and new field at that time, and the conferences brought together young and senior researchers in this field. Now, more than 30 years later, this field has matured, and Philippe has made contributions also to this field, not only to growth and innovation. And in particular, I want to mention his publication on formal and real authority in organizations, because it is widely cited and it inspired my own research. Philippe wrote this paper together with Jean Tirole, who also was a regular participant at these conferences on the economics of information. He received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2014. Together with Jean, Philippe's model describes that the members of an organization have conflicting interests that are only partially aligned. At the same time, costly information acquisition is necessary and important to avoid very bad decisions. By giving the authority to select the favorite position, a member of the organization can be given incentives to invest effort in information acquisition. Therefore, the trade-off between conflicting objectives and information incentives determines the optimal allocation of authority. Philippe's lecture today, however, is in another area of his research. It's on innovation and growth. In 1989, Philippe was assistant professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology when I was visiting. And I well remember his presentation of a model of growth through creative destruction in one of the Lunchback seminars. A few years later, this paper was published in Econometrica, one of the leading economics journals. According to Google Scholar, it has by now more than 10,000 citations. This paper and many of Philippe's subsequent publications apply Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction to explain economic growth. In earlier neoclassical theory, the growth rate is explained by exogenous population and productivity growth. Newer theories of endogenous growth hold that economic growth is primarily the result of investment in human capital, innovation, and knowledge. Philippe's work makes an important contribution to this field. It explains endogenous growth by innovations driven by entrepreneurial investment in research. The success of research, as we all know, is stochastic, and so major innovations occur randomly. In line with Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction, innovations make old technologies obsolete. Thus, technological change and technological progress creates not only gains, but also losses. Because old skills and manufacturing processes become obsolete. Technological breakthroughs have also aggregate effects, and the rate of growth, therefore, is not a constant, but follows a random trend. In today's lecture, Philippe will use this view of the growth process to address important current issues: the decline in productivity growth and the threat of stagnation. Philippe, I'm looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
So I have to, I think I have to do this.
It's on the...
So how do I, sorry. And then it's Berlin part 1, Berlin part 2. Oh yes, exactly. Excellent. Great. And then I go to the other one, animation. Which one? No. 1 second. Me, I have to guess the, because I want to do slideshow. Yeah, full screen. How do I do that? I go to Builder. I do under. I don't know. It's anima. Voila, this one, and you get begin font. Voila, excellent. Thank you very much. So thanks so much for inviting me, and of course you've been way too generous with the introductions. So Stefan and Helmut, thanks so much. It's always intimidating because you raise expectations and I have to live up to the expectations. So I know it's been a great pleasure to know you, and Helmut, we used to go to Gersense together, which was to be nice, the Summer Institute. So it's true that I've been working for the past 31 years on developing with Peter Howitt a Schumpeterian growth paradigm. So the idea was to develop a model, a paradigm, that we could use to have a dialogue between theory and empirics on growth, and very much on microdata. That's what we wanted to do. So the first, so we build a paradigm based on the three main ideas. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by innovation. So that's a bit a corollary of Solow. Solow tells you that capital accumulation alone doesn't give you long-run growth of per capita GDP. You need technical progress. It doesn't tell you where technical progress comes from. So first thing, long-run growth comes from innovation. Second thing, innovation do not come from heaven. They result from entrepreneurial investment aimed at improving products, creating new products. And so you can talk about policy of growth. or institutions of growth. The third idea is creative destruction, is that new products tend to be better than old products. And so new technologies tend to drive out old technologies. So you can talk about a political economy of growth. You see, growth is a conflicting process between the old and the new. And that, I think, is a very important aspect of the growth process. And so we developed a model, and then we went through different things where, in fact, we could address a number of enigmas. So among the enigmas that we could address, for example, is competition and growth. Why could competition be good for growth? That was the first enigma. First, there was the view that competition would be bad because competition would reduce the innovation rents and therefore discourage growth. But in fact, we know empirical work had shown that there tend to be a positive relationship between competition and growth, and we realized that in fact the Schumpeterian framework allows you to understand that. Suppose you are a classroom, you are all very good and equally good, but suppose some of you are better than others, and I open the door and I let someone come into the room who is very good. Those who are at the top of the class, they will work harder to beat the entrant. Those at the bottom, they're already discouraged, they will be even more discouraged. And but if you have enough good people, the overall effect of competition is positive on innovation and growth. If you have many people at the back, it's negative. So you can understand also why in more advanced countries where you have more people who are more firms, that are frontier firms, competition has a more positive effect on innovation and growth. You see, so those are that was a kind of first enigma, competition and growth, understand how it works. Another one was the middle income trap. How is it that some countries started to grow very fast, like Japan, for example, or France until 1975, and then they stopped growing fast? What happened? And then we had this idea that I developed with Zili Botti and Acemoglu of middle income trap. But even countries that are not middle income can have the trap. That means you have institutions that are good for catching up, because one way to grow is to catch up, to imitate. But they are not necessarily the institutions that are good to innovate at the frontier. So for example, to catch up, I don't need labor market flexibility. I could have large firms that tend to imitate all the time the new technologies. So you don't need competition so much. You don't need labor market flexibility so much. You don't need graduate education so much. But you don't need equity financing so much. You can deal with bank finance is enough. But if you're in the business of frontier innovation, you need more labor market flexibility, because frontier innovation is a lot about creative destruction. You need competition, because that's at the frontier, as I mentioned in a moment, that you escape competition by innovating. You need graduate education. You have the Silicon Valley next to Stanford, or you have Route 128 close to MIT and Harvard. And you need equity finance, venture capital, and all that. So the institutions that are good for catching up are not the same as those that are good for. So that's another enigma that I dealt with, the middle income trap. Another enigma that I was very interested in is the link between inequality and growth. How do you explain the rise in top income inequality? And innovation turns out to be a part of it. I mean, you have what I call Steve Jobs and Carlos Slim. You have Steve Jobs, he's a guy who became very rich because of Apple, and Carlos Slim is a guy who became very rich because he became head of an unregulated private monopoly in telecom in Mexico. You see what I mean? It's not the same story, but both are part. And so it tells you something. So you say, what kind you have, what do you make of the fact that top income inequality, because it's very interesting, you have two sources of top income inequality that do not have the same effects on growth, on social mobility, and on overall inequality. Innovation raises top income inequality, but it is good for social mobility. Creative destruction generates social mobility. And when you look at the effect of innovation on global inequality, you see that there is not much, whereas entry barriers, Carlos Slim stuff, corruption, entry barriers, that is not only it raises top income inequality, but it reduces social mobility, it reduces growth because it puts entry barriers to new innovations, and it raises global inequality. So you see, you can use the Schumpeterian framework to talk about inequality and growth, and that's a big thing. So today, what I would like to do is to talk about another enigma, which is the secular stagnation, where again the Schumpeterian framework can help to understand. Okay, So, alors, you don't have, I turn with I do with, like this is fine. No problem. Yeah, okay. So, this map, this is about, you know, productive, it's the continuous line is labor productivity, and the dotted line is total factor productivity in the US over the you know, all the past century until 2011, this century. You see, so those correspond to waves. To the left, you see, you have another mountain that you don't see the top of the mountain. That was the steam engine wave, you see, that came with the Industrial Revolution. Then you have the second wave, which is the electricity chemistry wave, which culminates at 1441 in the US. And then you have the third wave, which is the ICT wave, okay? And now, someone like Bob Gordon, he has various writings. For example, he has an article in 2012. He tells you, well, look, you know, the ICT wave is less of a big deal than the electricity wave. And if you take a ruler and you extrapolate, you think that growth is a parenthesis. We know there was no growth before 1820 worldwide, essentially. You see, growth is a very recent phenomenon. And his view is that growth is a parenthesis because, you know, we would go down and down and down, and growth is finished. And in particular, I will be interested by the going down after 2001. You see that TFP growth goes down in the US after the early 2000. And I want to understand why is that? What is behind this? Okay? So usually you refer to secular stagnation in many ways. You refer to it saying that it all goes down since 1941. But the secular stagnation is also to try and understand why you have this decline in productivity growth in the US, but also in other developed countries since the early 2000s. And that's what I will be concerned by here. Okay? So there have been various candidate explanations. One explanation is ideas are harder to find. So I will get to that one. A second explanation is that somehow, because the cost of credit has gone down, in fact, there has been bad reallocation of credit across firms. We've let lame ducks survive, or we left zombie firms survive. And that's not good for TFP growth, okay? There is a third explanation, which is that measurement. We don't know how to measure TFP growth properly. And there is a fourth explanation that superstar firms are a mixed blessing. They seem to be good at the beginning, and they kill the growth process later on. So let me go through these explanations, okay? And so ideas harder to find. So that's a recent paper by Nick Bloom, Chad Jones from Stanford. Both of them are from Stanford. John Van Reenen and Michael Webb. And essentially what they say is that, well, you know, economic growth, TFP growth, is the product of two things: research productivity and the number of researchers. You could look at that. It's you could have that relationship. And the view is to say, well, economic growth has remained constant. You see, if you look at the rate of economic growth in the long run, it has remained pretty constant, a slight decline lately, okay? But at the same time, the number of researchers has gone up a lot. That's Chad Jones wrote on that already back in '95. And so if that's true, it's because it must be the case that the research productivity has gone down. If we are, what we call research productivity is how much more growth we reach with more researchers. It must have gone down because you had more researchers and the rate of growth didn't go up proportionally to the number of researchers. It's the growth without scale effects, if you've looked at. So that's a bit their thing. So that's the idea that somehow, why is that? And so then they look at examples. They say, well, let's aggregate, but you could look at examples. For example, we know there is what we call the Moore's law, that if you look at a chip, on the chip you can have transistors, and the number of transistors on a silicium chip doubles every 2 years. That's the Moore's law, more or less. Okay? And so you get the various stages. You see what I mean? Every 2 years. In fact, every 18 months to be to be totally precise, okay? And, but they say, on the other hand, you see, so you could look at that as a rate of growth of the quality of ships. The rate of growth of the quality of ships seem to be constant. You see what I mean? And on the other hand, the number of researchers employed to double or to increase the number of transistors is higher today, is 18 times higher today than in the early 70s. So you keep having the same growth rate of the number of transistors in a chip, but you have many more people working in the thing. So his view is that, you see, its ideas are harder to get. Well, you see, that's the views. And that's how that's their explanation to the slowdown, okay? My question to them, I discussed their paper at the American Economic Association last January. And my question is that even research directed at semiconductors involves dimension other than changing the density of transistors. You add new features to the chip, you make the chip less expensive, you add multiple cores. So in fact, the variety of products within a narrow category of semiconductors has increased over time. So their research effort should be deflated by a measure of product variety. And if they do that, they would not find so much decreasing returns. That's my criticism to them. What they show is interesting, but it's the interpretation of what they find that I take issue with, okay? But I mentioned that, but that's, and also another question I had to them, I'm not putting all the discussion, is how much of the apparent decreasing returns to R&D are truly technological. R&D expenditure can be put to other use, including entry deterrence. We know that from the work of John Sutton and others, okay? And in fact, it turns out that larger firms tend to patent less and to lobby more. There's been a very interesting recent paper by Ufuk Aksigit, Salome Baslanze, and Francesca Lotti from the Bank of Italy about Italian firms. And they know for Italian firms the political connections. They employ politicians, okay? And that's a very interesting picture from their work. What you show on the horizontal axis is the firm's market rank. So if you are to the left, you are a market leader. You have a high share of the market. The more to the right, the lower your share of the market, okay? And the triangles are the number of politicians per unit of labor that you hire. You see what I mean? And the square are the patents per labor, okay? So you normalize by the size of the firm, okay? And what's very interesting is that you see that market leaders, they tend to patent much less, and they put much more effort into hiring politicians that guarantee them markets, so put entry barriers. They get connections, you see? Whereas when you are small and young, you go mainly into patenting and much less in political connections. You have a life cycle of a firm. When I'm a young firm, I innovate a lot. When I'm an old firm, I do politics, okay? Well, that's in Italy. I don't know if it's, usually France looks very much like Italy, although now we try to look better, no? With Macron, we are changing. But anyway, so that's interesting because it means that maybe there is an element already of market power there, and I will get back to that later. So that's the ideas harder to find. Are you still with me? Are you still alive? Okay, very good. So I want to talk now about the second explanation, which is reallocation. So the argument here, so I developed that argument in work with friends at the Bank of France, because the great thing being in France, we have access to very good data, and part of the data, some of them come from the Bank of France. The story is as follows. We observed a decrease in interest rate over the past decades. You see, that's the story. That's the real long-term interest rate on 10-year sovereign bonds. And you see that you look at various developed countries and the euro area as a whole, and you see that the long-term interest rate have declined in all areas since the mid-1980s. And so you might think that that's a good news for productivity growth, because your reasoning could be, well, it's easier, it's less costly to do various things, including to innovate. But on the other hand, you see, the thing is that when you are in a Schumpeterian world, you always have new firms who want to enter instead of all firms. If you make the life of incumbent firms too easy, you make it harder for new firms to enter. You see, that's the thing. And I will give you an example of that in a moment. So you help whenever I help existing firms, I help the firm do even more productivity growth. But the problem is that I may also make it harder for other firms to enter the market. And that's a reallocation effect. And sometimes that reallocation effect may dominate the direct effect, okay? In fact, you have an inverted U, you see, to mention your name. Starting from a world where you have very high credit constraint, relaxing a bit the credit constraint, that gives you more growth because some can invest more. But beyond a certain point, the reallocation effect may dominate. That's why usually it's not a great idea to have very low interest rate in booms. You want to have a counter-cyclical monetary policy. You want to lower interest rate and do quantity easing in recession. But if you do that in booms, you have various problems with that. One problem being the misallocation. And that's not a new idea. People like Gita Gopinath and others have shown evidence of the misallocation effect of low interest rates, okay? So the idea there is that the downside of low interest rate is that it allows inefficient incumbents to remain on the market. This in turn may have discouraged potentially more efficient firms to enter the market. It's similar to the kind of, I don't know if you know the paper by Acemoglu, Bloom, Aghion, and Kerr on reallocation and growth. They look at the effect of industrial policy, and they emphasize a similar kind of effect. If you help incumbent firms, you have the problem that you may make it more costly for new firms to enter. So you have to, when you do industrial policy, to not forget the potential entrants. And that's a kind of important idea, which again is at play here. So, so the data there that we use is come from FIBEN, is a large French firm level database constructed by the Bank of France and based on fiscal documents, including balance sheets, and it contains detailed information on firms' activities and size. And then we have data on firms' quotation, on firms' rating, how firms are rated. There are firms that we think they can reimburse you for sure because they are very serious. And there are firms we think they are hopeless, they will never reimburse you. You have ratings, okay? And so, in fact, the rating, I put that in 3 categories. You have the rating, so here the low is better. So if you have 3++, you are very, very good. If you are 3+, you are good. You are not as good as a 3++, okay? When you are 4+, you are not as good as a 3++, but you are really, really good. And then you have the second category that goes from 4 to 5+. And then you have 5 and below, which is bad. Usually, those are firms that you should just avoid, having in your portfolio, okay? So that's the category. And we use the natural experiment because Draghi, under Draghi, there were various programs that were implemented by the ECB, and they are very helpful because they provide you with natural experiments. So what happened is that there is a program that was called additional credit claims as an instrument. And in the euro area, banks can pledge corporate loans as collateral in their refinancing operation with the ECB, as long as these loans are of sufficient quality. What did they do under Draghi? The loans rated 4 could not qualify before, and now they can qualify for refinancing with the ECB. You see? So you have the before and after, and you have the diff and diff. You can do a good diff and diff, okay? So what you do, so that what happened is that the ACC extended the eligibility criterion to include firms rated 4 in the Bank of France quotation. The ACC program was announced in December 2011 and implemented in February 2012, okay? And that's the amount of new loan divided by revenue, okay? And you see that I look at the control group is the 5+. 5+ remains something which is non-eligible, but 4 now becomes eligible. You can use a firm rated 4, a loan to a firm rated 4 for refinancing with the ECB. You can use it as a collateral. You see what I mean? And you see, before 2012, the evolution of the loans to revenue ratio for firms rated 4 or 5 plus, you cannot distinguish them. But you see that after the things in enforced, the firms rated, which is the treatment group, the firms rated 4, they would have much more lending than the firm rating 5 plus, which go down. You see that? Okay, so you explore this. This is the experiment, you see? So now what I do is that I look now, this regression is the growth rate, is the productivity growth of a firm I at time t. I regress it on whether you are treated or not treated. So whether you are treated, and treated is a dummy that is equal to 0 before the time where you extend the program and is equal to 1 after you extend the program, okay? And, treated, equals 0, no. Treated is equal to 1 if you are a 4 and to 0 if you are not a 4, that's treated. And ACC T is a dummy equal to 0 before you implement the ACC and equal to 1 after you implement the ACC, okay? And what do you see is that, you are interested by the interaction, by how much more you get of growth when you are treated, when you are a 4, compared with a 5 plus, after ACC versus before. And you see that you get the first two columns, you see that it's positive significant. RZ is for Rajan Zingales. It means that if you are a firm that relies a lot on external finance or not, if you don't rely much on external finance, it makes no big difference, your growth. But if you are a firm that relies on external finance, you are a 4, your growth goes up a lot after the extension of the, of this, the refinancing to firms quoted 4. You see what I mean? You get more credit, quoi. Yeah. Why the last 4 columns are insignificant? Because you see, the column 4 and 5 replace the variable post-ACC by a dummy for being larger, for being 1 versus 0 in dates which were not the dates of the implementation of ACC. Okay? So those are placebos. Okay? So there's nothing happened then. And the last 2 columns, instead of comparing between 4 and 5 plus, you compare between 3 and 4 plus or 5 plus and 5, and those two, the new experiment didn't make a difference between them. You see what I mean? And that's why you get no effect. You see how it works? The effect is only 4 versus 5 plus. The growth of the 4, the productivity growth goes up with respect to the control group, which is 5 plus, after the ACC is implemented versus the before. Okay? Alors now that's the good side of relaxing the constraint. We have relaxed the credit constraint on the firms rated 4. But now the downside is here is the exit. We know the exit because we know the liquidations. And that's the exit rates. And what happens is that it's true that you increase the productivity growth of firms, that you relax constraint. But you also make them less likely to exit. And what's very interesting here is that it's particularly, you see, the low productivity firms that are less likely to exit. You see, look at the second column, look at the second row. That's the interaction between treated and post-ACC. And you see that it's particularly for the low productivity, the third column, that you have a negative effect on exit. You see, so the problem there is that this natural experiment, of course, it allows firms to invest more in R&D, improve, but it lowered exit, particularly on the low productivity firms rated 4. And that's where it has overall a negative effect. And if you do that, I do that at firm level, if you do that at sectoral level, you see that because of that, you get the inverted U that I was mentioning before. And so to link to secular stagnation, the view is that because credit because we've done a lot of, quantity easing, zero interest rate, very lax, because of course we were right, we wanted to avoid the worst effect of the crisis. The downside of that is that, we've gone against the reallocation effect. So you see, we are completely in a Schumpeterian growth there. If you take a model, a non-Schumpeterian model, you cannot at all account for this. It's totally based on the Schumpeterian effect. Okay. So that's an explanation, okay? You are still alive? You're fantastic. Ah, okay. So now I will talk about measurement. So one view is to say, well, in fact, you didn't have really a slowdown. Ah, this is lovely. You didn't have really a slowdown. What happened is that we don't know how to measure growth properly. Is that we've gone more and more into things where you cannot measure TFP properly or GDP properly. And so let me just start with that, in a soft way. For example, I mean, these are things that you know, but I start with things that you know very well, is photo pictures. You see, photo pictures. When I was a child, I used to buy a camera. I would get that as a present, and then I had to buy the pellicule. No, how you say la pellicule? What you put in the camera? How is it called? How you say it in English? The film, exactly, the film. And then you had to pay for developing the film because I didn't have a black room in my apartment. I had to have okay, and so that would take and it would cost something. The expected number of photo pictures per year worldwide in 2000 was about 80 billion photos. In 2015, it goes up to 1,600 billion photos. Okay, the cost of a photo picture has gone from around 50 cents to almost zero. And this evolution is not captured by GDP measure. The price of a photo hinges on material elements that are disappearing: camera, printing cost, film cost, and all that. Photos are shared now rather than sold. It's very much non-marchand, you see, non-market. The development of smartphones has induced the decline of sales of camera and therefore a decline in measured GDP. And there's been studies on that. That's, for example, here you look at camera production. So first you have the first cameras, the analog. They went up and down. And then you have the compact digital. And then with the arrival of the smartphones, you see that the production of digital cameras has gone down a lot. But with that, you see the difficulty of measuring photo in GDP has become harder because you don't know. You have smartphones. You see photo there, you don't know what it is. And if you look there, you see at how much you spend on photos. For example, in 1990, the cost of processing is $25. The cost of a film per household per year. The cost of a film, $19. Total 45. And it went down to, a total of 5, a bit more than $5. You see what I mean? And of course, you had a big raise in consumer surplus, but that raise in consumer surplus is not captured by GDP measures, okay? So those are things, of course, that people know, and they say maybe it has become more dramatic lately. Another thing is the chips. I spoke about the Moore law before, okay? Does the evolution of price reflect quality increase over time? You had a fast decline of the price up to the mid-2000, and then after mid-2000, the price of chips has become stable, but yet the technological advances have remained significant. For example, I got back to the Moore's law, okay? So I showed already that picture, but to show something else, when I said ideas harder to get, okay? So you have the Moore's law, but in a sense, that's another criticism I could have made to the previous paper, is that, in fact, you have various ways to measure the performance of a chip. The one is the clock frequency, the number of operations performed by the chip every second. This is directly linked to the number of transistors. But you also have other measures. For example, there is spec, which is a score measure based on the implementation of tasks that meet users' need. And it's a quality measure that goes beyond the number of tasks that the chip performs. And what you can see is that over time, it's true that since the 2000, the clock speed has stabilized, and that's why the price has stabilized. But in fact, you see, the spec indicator has kept rising, and that's not reflected in the price correctly. And so therefore, there is something, so in the Moore's law, maybe when they say ideas harder to get, no, it's because they had the wrong measure. They used the first measure. If they had used the spec, maybe my friends Nick Bloom et al. Would not have found that ideas were harder to get, okay? Okay, but that has to do with measurement here. You see that? now I get into my completely known territory. One thing, and it's very Schumpeterian, is that I have looked at another source of mismeasurement, and my source of mismeasurement is creative destruction. And first, I will show you this diagram. This diagram shows we rank sector in the US in terms of how much creative destruction there is. Here, I look at job turnover. Job turnover is the rate at which you lay off and hire new labor, okay? But you could look at firm churning as well, the rate at which new firms replace old firms. So when you have a lot of creative destruction, there is a lot of new replacing old. And on the vertical axis, I look at the correlation between measured TFP growth and the flow of patents, the annual flow of patents. And what we find here is that the more creative destruction there is, the lower the correlation between measured growth and patenting, which is a way to say the more creative destruction there is, the less patenting is reflected in measured productivity growth. Somehow we are less good at integrating innovation in the growth measure when you have more creative destruction. So the question is there something behind that, okay? And then I used to tell always the story of the tap and the bottle, okay? So suppose you have, and my story goes as follows. Look at this bottle between yesterday and today. Suppose that the price has gone up between yesterday and today, and I didn't make any change to the bottle. It's pure inflation. Okay, now suppose that in fact, instead of that, I put a tap on top. You see that the bottle is the same, but I put a tap and the price goes up. I can more or less figure out how much is inflation and how much is the improvement that I did by putting the tap. But what happens if I replace this bottle by this? We cannot figure out what is inflation and what is not. So what the statistical offices do, they do extrapolation. They take various categories of products. They know that a subset of the products were not replaced between yesterday and today. And they say, well, I will compute the rate of inflation for that category of products by just taking the products that were not replaced. And I will assume that this is the rate of inflation for the whole category of products, including those who have been replaced. You see what I mean? They call that imputation in the US, and they call that extrapolation in Europe. But that's very bad, because typically the new products that replace the old products are much better. So you tend to underestimate quality improvement, and you tend to overestimate inflation. And in a moment, I will illustrate what I mean by that. Okay, so let's consider the following example. How long do I have left? Half an hour. Okay. So consider the following example. That's where nobody has a clicker, but it would be nice for me to show the lines. You don't have a clicker, no? No, but I need to put that. No, don't worry. I can. So look at suppose that you have items, and 80% of items are like this bottle where I didn't make any change between yesterday and today. No, don't. Oh. No, it's perfect. I don't need. No, stay. No, don't. Oh la la. Ah, thank you. Now let me. Here. Thank you very much. Oh la la, this is fantastic. Thank you. So suppose that 80% of the items are like the bottle that I had here, where I make no change between yesterday and today, okay? And suppose that the quality adjusted price, which is the price because there was no quality adjustment, you had a 4% inflation between yesterday and today, no innovation. Suppose that for 10% of items, is this bottle being replaced by this bottle, where there I can measure and I can say, look, the quality adjusted price was -6, okay? The price divided by quality went up by -6 because the tap improves a lot, okay? But that is innovation without creative destruction. And suppose that 10% of the items it's the story of the bottle replaced by this. That's creative destruction, okay? So now, and suppose that the true inflation rate between yesterday and today is 2%, and the true growth rate, real growth, is 2%. So that means that nominal growth is 2 plus 2, which is 4. And suppose that everything which is nominal, the government perfectly observes. So the government knows that the nominal rate of growth is 4%. Okay? But he doesn't know the true decomposition. He should have guessed 2 and 2, but he will not guess 2 and 2. He knows the total is 4. So how will the government compute inflation? Well, the government will ignore these guys. He will ignore these. And he will say, look, 80 out of 80 plus 10 have 4% inflation. And 10 divided by 80 plus 10, which is 1/9, they have minus 6%. And so they will calculate the inflation rate at 2.9. And then they will say, well, the inflation I calculate is 2.9. I know that true nominal growth is 4. So missing growth, so the measured growth is 4 minus 2.9. And they will estimate the true real growth, at 1.1, whereas the true growth was 2. So they missed 0.9 of growth. You understand the thing? That's the reasoning. If you understood that, you understood the whole thing. They overestimated inflation, and therefore they underestimated the true growth. Okay? That's the idea. Okay? So that's a recent work I've done with Pete Clino, Timo Boppart, Antonin Bergeau, and Yui Lee. And so that's essentially, you measure, so M is equal to PY. You want to know YT plus 1 over YT, which is real growth. Well, it's equal to nominal growth, which you perfectly measure, divided by the inflation rate. This is the true real growth, and what you estimate is that you have the true nominal growth divided by the measured inflation. But because you mismeasure inflation, you will mismeasure the rate of growth. In fact, you see the missing growth is just equal to this difference between your measured inflation and the true inflation. Okay? So now the way we do. So if you are in a world which is CES, a CES function, okay, with elasticity of substitution sigma between the goods, okay. In fact, you can show that it's a very simple formula for the missing growth. You can calculate the share, how the share of the continuing products evolves. Because what is imputation about? Imputation is saying that I concentrate on those who survive to calculate the growth rate. Okay? Suppose that the market share of these guys remain constant between yesterday and today. It means that the continuers grew at the same rate as the overall economy. So by concentrating on the continuers, I did not miss any growth. So that would be the case if SIT T-1, which is the share of continuers yesterday divided by their share today, was equal to 1. You see, if the log of 1 is 0, and then I have no missing growth. But what is very nice, you can show this very simple formula for the missing growth, which is 1 over sigma minus 1, the log of the share yesterday divided by the share of continuers today. Your share is the employment share, or you can calculate it at the payroll share or the revenue share, okay? And you get very similar things. So I don't want to deviate. So we do the analysis at the plant level. We use the longitudinal business database. We focus on the period 83-2013. We infer the share of employment of continuers yesterday and today from LBD information on employment, or we do it using payroll as a measure of market share. And that's what we find with reasonable value of elasticity of substitution. And we find that the missing growth, you see, it's amazing, per year, that's an average per year. In the US, per year, over the period 83-2013, you underestimated productivity growth by as much as 0.64. It's enormous. They are 0.64 above us, above what they say they are. And you see what's interesting is that it has gone up, if anything, a bit over time. And in fact, now I can look at the missing, at the measured, and the true. So what you can see now in the US, so those are yearly averages, okay? And what you can see is that the measured growth has gone down. The total, which is the measured plus missing, has gone down lately. But it's true that missing growth represents a higher share of the total now than it did before, which means that part of the decline is because missing growth has gone up. So you explain 10% of the stagnation, 10% of the decline over the period 2006-2013 is explained by just this missing growth from creative destruction. Here I didn't here factor in the measurement problem with photos, with chips and all that. Just the creative destruction accounts for 10% of the missing growth, of the decline in measured growth. You see what I mean? It's because the share of missing growth has gone up. But it does not explain the remaining 90%. So I need to go further. I cannot just stop there. But at least what I say already there, it's when I tell Gordon, when you use secular stagnation, use secular but not stagnation. Because when you have a yearly rate of productivity growth of 172, which means that the true growth is at 2.5, this is, in France, is nirvana. We call that fantastic. You see what I mean? We celebrate. We would not call that stagnation. Secular, yes, but stagnation, no. So you have the curve that I showed before, but you are above that curve. You see what I mean? The true curve is above the curve. It has the same waves, a little bit less steep because, on the last part. But you are way above the true curve, okay? So that's good news. We grow faster than we pretend to grow, okay? It's important for inflation targets, by the way. Our inflation rate is overestimated. So I know I am in a country which is very worried about inflation. You should not worry so much because inflation is overestimated. We are at least 0.6 below the inflation rate that you estimate. So you should not worry about inflation so much, okay? It's good to tell that message here. Okay, anyway. Now that's very nice because you can now, we know the missing growth, and we can calculate missing growth not only at the level of the economy, but we can calculate missing growth at the level of sectors, taking two-digit sectors. And we see that the sectors that have more turnover, here for example measured by the annual entry rate into the sector, and are those sectors where you have more missing growth. So you see a very clear correlation between the missing growth and the rate of turnover in the sector. You can see that also geographically. I looked at France. For example, south of France, you have a lot of, or Paris or around Lyon, you have a lot of turnover, but you have a lot of missing growth. If you go to the east, you have no match, missing growth and turnover. Okay. So now I want to look at the last explanation, which is superstar firms, okay? So I move to the second part. No, part 2. No. Is it animation? This one? Build? Yeah, excellent. Okay. So now I look at a last explanation. How long do I have left? 15 minutes? 20? I'll be done before. Okay. So that's based on current work with the same people with whom I did the missing growth from creative destruction, the same team. Okay. It's called a theory of rising rents and slowing growth. And I would like to motivate it a bit because you could say, well, you have this decline, and you might think, well, artificial intelligence might be the way to solve your problem. You see, why would artificial intelligence be a good thing? So let me say a few words about artificial intelligence. Well, it's the idea that you can automate tasks. So because you can automate tasks, the boundaries increase. You see, tasks that could only be performed by labor, which is in finite supply, you can perform them with using capital goods, which are in reproducible supply. You see what I mean? So, and that can be true not only for the production of goods and services, but also for the production of ideas. Ideas also involve tasks that you could automate to some extent. So that, in principle, you say, well, growth possibilities are much bigger than what I thought, because you can bypass you see the limits of, you know, having a limited population or whatever, or limited skills, because you can partly replace in the production of services and in the production of ideas by machines that you produce. So in principle, that should lead to unbounded growth. And in fact, theoretically, in recent work I've done with Chad Jones and Ben Jones, you can look at my website or in BER paper that we have, we show that, for example, if in finite time you could completely dispense with human beings to do research and just rely on machines, you could get what we call singularities. You could achieve infinite income in finite time. Of course, we don't believe in that. But theoretically, you can achieve infinite income in finite time. So in principle, AI can give you a lot, but it can give you the worst as well. You see what I mean? And so, however, rather than stimulate a growth, AI may end up stall it in proper institutions are not put in place. And that will be a theme that I will develop now, in fact. So I would like to motivate this last part of the talk. I want to show you a few facts. A first fact is that you had rising, then declining productivity growth in OECD countries. So you see, for example, in the US, 96, 2005, were years with accelerating total factor productivity growth. It was the IT revolution. It's the peak of the IT. And then IT has gone down. And what we want to understand is particularly this decline. But you see, between here and here, it has gone up. It went up and then down. You would like to explain that. Okay? That's the first fact. Second fact, you had declining entry and exit over the last period. You have entry and exit of establishment. You see that particularly entry of establishment has gone down. Okay, so the growth rate is here, as I showed, but you see that the entry has gone down, you see? So that's another fact. A third fact is that you had a rising market concentration. So you had an increased concentration of market share in most industries over the period 1997-2017, in particular in the IT sector with the emergence of the GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. But more generally, the fraction of industries where the 4 biggest firms account for more than 30% has increased from 30% to 40%. That's from work by Autor, Van Rienen, Katz, and Dorn, and another co-author. I don't have the name here. So here that is taken directly from their work. And you can see, for example, the share CR4, the CR4 with the little balls, those are the share of sales accounted for by the 4 biggest manufacturing firm in the US, okay? And it goes up. But also the share of sales of the 20th biggest firm go up. And here I look in finance, similar. But I could look at retail, I could look at various sectors, and you see again and again this rise in market concentration. Okay, so that's an important fact. There is another fact, which is the declining labor share. So the labor share has gone down from 65% to 58% since 2007, mainly driven by reallocation across firms. So that's very interesting. The labor share has gone down, not because within a firm it has gone down. It's because firms with lower labor share have become more prominent. That's it's a between firm phenomenon, not a within firm, okay? And you can see that in the US in particular, but it's true also in other countries. That's the labor share. Okay? Then you have another fact, which is non-increasing investment. Investment have gone down, the private investment. If I could isolate R&D investment, it's even bigger. The R&D investment goes down by more. So you have growth going up and down, entry going down, R&D investment going down, labor share going down, but because of a between firm. Concentration going up. And the last fact, you have an increase in average markup. But again, it's not because the markup within firm went up. It's because firms with higher markup became a higher share of the total economy. Okay? And in particular there, I should mention the recent work by Bakae and Fari and Delocker-Eckhout. Those are the 2 papers to look at. And they show that the average markup has increased, but the average change in markup has been negative within average markup. So the markup has gone up on average across firms, but if you do the average of within, it goes the other way. You see what I mean? And you see that there. If you look at the at the markup, you see the dotted line has gone up, but you see that this line, if anything, tends to go down. That's the cross entropy. That's the average of the within, and those do not follow the same patterns. Okay. So now, how can we explain that with one model? And that's what we've tried to do, is to say, can we have a model that accounts for all these facts? Okay. And we take a Schumpeterian growth model, so a model where growth is driven by innovation, innovation is driven by profit-motivated activity, and you have creative destruction. It's a Schumpeterian growth model, but the novelty is that we have what we call superstar firms. So you start with a final good produced with a continuum of intermediate inputs. That's where you are, okay? So for example, you can take this function, inputs I, and Q of I is the quality of input I in producing final output, okay? Is the quality of variety I. M is the number of product variety, which you can take fixed or you may allow to increase, okay? And now the thing is that a particular firm, it has a range of, that we take from Clété-Cortum, a particular firm has a range of varieties. I produce a range of varieties. And I expand on my varieties by doing creative destruction on someone else. I improve upon Stefan and Helmut, and I increase the size of my firm, okay? That's how I expand. So now that means I can run many lines, but of course running more lines has a cost for me because there are organizational costs. So there is a convex cost of running more lines. And now I want to look at the effect of decreasing this cost. You see, you have a convex increasing cost of running more lines, and suddenly look at a change, a technological change, that will shift down this curve. You see what I mean? So in principle, everybody could expand. Okay? That's what I'm looking at. So now the novelty there is that the firms, they differ in the quality Q of I on the line, but you have also superstar and non-superstar firms. The superstar firms are those that access network. And because they access a network, for any level of productivity, if Marianne and I, we are the same level of Q, still you are a superstar, you have a lower cost than me to exploit the line. Because you are a superstar, because you access the network and I don't. You access the data and I don't. So the novelty here is on top of the quality difference, the Q of I, you have a source of heterogeneity which is time invariant. A subset of firms, call them superstar, have lower production costs for any quality level, for example, because of a network effect. Okay? And so you see you are like that. Your Y is an L times a phi, and for Marianne the phi is high, for me the phi is low. Okay? And so the markup that I do is not before in a model without this heterogeneity. It would just be the ratio of my quality to the quality of my next best competitor. But here I have to multiply by the ratio of my phi to the phi of my competitor. This is innovation that will determine Q, but the phi is intrinsic to us, you see. I am superstar or I am not superstar. So now, suppose, for example, that the phi takes only two values, phi h and phi l, and denote by delta the ratio of the phi of Marianne to my phi, okay? It determines how much better you are with respect to me for any level of Q. So now I look at the effect of a downward shift in the convex cost of running n lines. Suppose you have a technology like IT that makes it possible to increase the span of control. You can span more lines, okay? What will happen? Well, superstar firms will expand at the expense of non-superstar firms. And what will happen, therefore, is R&D investment and entry by non-superstar will be partly discouraged. So what will happen on growth? Aggregate productivity growth first will go up, because when the cost of expansion goes down, it will allow superstars to expand, and they have higher productivity. So just because they expand at the expense of others, in the short run, productivity will go up. But in the longer term, it will discourage innovation by non-superstar. And if non-superstar represent the majority of firms in the economy, the overall effect in the long run will be negative. You see? Overall, superstar firms become larger, which leads to higher static efficiency. However, this comes at the expense of aggregate productivity growth, which declines in the long run. And you see, this model accounts for the above facts. You have increasing then decreasing productivity growth. The average markup increase, but it's entirely driven by the fact that the superstar firms take over the market. They are higher markup firms. It's not because markups went up. They keep their markup, but they become more prominent. Okay? The labor share will decline just because the superstar firms tend to employ less labor and they become more prominent. And entry and investment are discouraged because most firms are non-superstars and they will be discouraged by this expansion of superstars. So now that's what you get if you simulate the model with various, you get the growth rate going up and then going down, you see. And you might have thought a priori that it should only go up, but in this case it goes up and down. And now there is a role for the state there because competition policy could come into play. For example, why not here data access to the network as an entry barrier for non-superstar firms? In our model, increasing phi, which is the proportion of of non-superstar firm, or limiting NH, increasing the fraction of firms that access the superstar technology, or limiting the ability for firms to expand, either thing would reduce the negative effect on growth. You see what I mean? If you say everybody can access, so there is no more delta, okay? Or you say there is a limit to which superstar firm can expand, either thing here would limit the extent to which growth goes down. You understand? Okay, so for example, if you increase phi a lot, if you increase the fraction of firms that have access to network, but then in fact the effect, this is just a blip, but in fact the effect on growth of reducing the cost of expansion will now become positive. It was negative and it will turn positive, you see. So that's where you are. You see, you get this. So in the case where you had phi equals 0.02, growth would evolve like this. In the case where phi is much bigger, growth increases, you see. So, so that's the thing. And so you see that now going back to AI, I was asking, why don't you have AI that will save you there? And I say, yes, potentially AI could, but you need to put in place the right competition policy. Because if you don't, AI will give you the opposite. It will give you what IT gave you. IT gave you the GAFAM, which ended up limiting the growth process. So AI will do that even more. So you have to put in place the right competition policy. So it's all about, this is all about matching institutions and policies with technical progress. It's true for competition policy. It's true also for other aspects if you want AI to work, which have to do with education and labor market policy. But that's beyond my point. But AI can give you growth and inclusiveness, but it can give you lower growth. It can give you more inequality, particularly if you have an uneducated labor force. And so you have to adapt your competition policy. That's what I illustrated, but you could look more generally at other aspects. You have to adapt competition policy, education policy, and labor market policy to the arrival of this new general purpose technology, because of course it will make it totally different whether you do it or not. You see, if you don't do that, you will have populism. You see, you have people saying we refuse the new technology because it brings us, il apporte le malheur, it brings us unhappiness. And I think that's a big lesson. You see, it's a paradox that AI, that you think would lead you to singularity and explosive growth, can in fact lead you to declining growth if the right competition policies are not put in place. I think I will stop there. Thank you very much. take some questions.
Presentation. We addressed a lot of issues, and we still have some time for questions from the audience. Any questions?
I think they are all dead. No? Yes.
Can you talk a little about what is actually happening in these areas of regulation? I mean, are people reacting? I mean, we don't have dinner tonight because Philippe has to...
But you know very well that France and Germany have an argument on what to do with Google, for example.
But with respect to AI...
So, do you see how tough should competition policy be? Well, now there could be argument. You don't want to discourage Google, but voilà, it's a big issue now. How you actually? Alors, do you use the same instruments? So a big debate in competition policy is that do we already have the instruments we need, but we just need to implement them, to use them more, or should we invent new instruments? That's a big debate among people working on competition policy. Do we just need to? We have the tools. We have the toolbox, but we should just use it, or we should just expand the toolbox. And that's a big question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I'm also very much interested on the issues on the present economic policies in Europe and how they fit or not fit into your framework. And if I look at the issues of what are the effects of the low interest rate, the subsidies for low productivity firms which stay there and so on. And this is actually the usual practice. I mean, we have now, of course, European Central Bank, which its inflation objective, which obviously is wrong. How the thing is really to get to this new thinking in policy and policy making, because that's actually blocking, and also what we are seeing with the industrial lobbying. Yeah. What you said, yeah. Market creations. Yeah. In the Commission we used the market creation to another context, much more positive way. But I mean, I have read lately literature on many countries, and obviously all these elements are there, and the national policies are reacting and acting like that, and also at the EU level, they try, of course, but they really do not. We are a little bit without advice and without understanding what are the next steps, and seeing all the time that the big revolution is coming, and it's just sort of danger and not an opportunity, like you are saying. So the issue is for me also to get the policy on board. Right.
I think the chance we have in the EU is that we have the European Commission for Competition. The question is, how can we do a better job? And also, people spoke about industrial policy at the European level. How should you do it? So should you totally avoid it? I believe that you can reconcile competition policy and industrial policy. But you should do industrial policy in the sense of saying sectoral policy in a way that does not prevent entrance, in a way that does not increase concentration. You see what I mean? So you can do pro-competition, pro-entry industrial policy. So I think it's very important, and it's true that the problem we have in the Commission is that industrial policy and competition policy are done by different people. They don't talk to each other. That, I think, is a first-order problem. And I know Juncker had a bit this idea that entrance you should take into account, but I think it's very important to have a kind of. It's good that we go for projects. I believe very much also that we should launch projects. Me, for example, I am in favor of French-German DARPA. I think that would be great. Then which other countries could join for tough technologies, to push tough technologies. And that would be something, that people could look up to. That would, I'm in favor of a project like this, which would be directly depending on the defense and energy ministries of France and Germany. So it would escape the European budget. No. Of course, it starts like this, and then includes, but I don't want the logic of I want my money back, and I don't want the logic of the veto. Well, I want to get, this is bullshit, I want to get rid of that. Voilà. And I want to have a thing which is really, you go for the best things, and of course any country could join, but you avoid veto, no, I want my money back. And to push what we call tough technologies. Tough technologies are technologies where the basic research has been done, and you are not yet at the stage of commercialization, because it's an S-curve, and you cannot go from there to there, because you have coordination problem and financing problem that prevents you from going from there to there. DARPA is Defense Advanced Research Program Agency in the US, was created during the Cold War, because they were racing with the Soviet Union, they needed to put man in space, they needed to go fast. So they created, it was very well done. You have program the directors that you take from the academia or from industry for 3 years. They push proposals, but for things that are measurable. And it worked very well. The laser, many inventions in the US came out of DARPA, one way, directly or indirectly. It was a big thing, and I think we should do something like that between France and Germany. So we start France-Germany, and then of course people who want to join, but without getting into the pitfalls of the current system. I think that something like that would be really cool to do. But still, I preserve for the rest, I preserve competition. The DARPA, it's more something where you go for big projects and where you have very clear deliverables. Otherwise, I am more for saying you can do. Usually, I am more for going horizontal, because that's a way to avoid picking winners and losers in general. But when you do sectoral policy, I am more for making it pro-competition. But there are areas where you can do this kind of project, when you have large fixed costs involved in particular. And there you can have the kind of the DARPA way to do things. May have proved to be very, very interesting. So I think we need ways that you combine, competition and industrial policy smartly, and I think that's a big challenge ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. I'm not an economist, I'm an industrial engineer, and I have two technical questions, so to speak. Your first slide with the total factor productivity, I think the highest value was 1941 for the US economy. Could there be any exogenous effects like the World War II or others which explains that curve or the highest?
The World War II?
Yeah, the World War II.
Oh, building towards World War II, but it was before, so it's interesting, their peak was before World War II. It could be that building towards World War II played a role, but and that the delay for the others was because they were hit directly by World War II, where the US was indirectly, there was Pearl Harbor, but they were not hit as directly as we were. So that might explain the delay. But what's very interesting is that you see that's interesting about AI also. Each time you had a big technological revolution, there was the fear that you would have massive unemployment. So when you had the steam engine, there was the Ludis movement, the Luder movement, because people were afraid that machines would replace people and they would lose their jobs. And you never saw massive unemployment. When you had electricity, Keynes was predicting mass unemployment in the US, and then you didn't have mass unemployment. And now again, people are very worried about unemployment and unemployment, but it's true, you have to adapt the institutions. So the answer is not that you should not just do anything and you have to adapt the institutions. So for example, it's true that with AI, many people work partly at home, partly self-employed, partly within firms, and you need to have an unemployment insurance system and a training system that accommodates this and still provides safety net. So you have to think about the institutional innovation when you think about the other. But that's my issue. Voilà, that's my.
My second question is for the creative destruction measurement. You used patent data. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Did I got it? My problem is patent data is representing R&D output and is not an innovation which is already introduced in the market. So I wonder how you captured that, and especially the time lag. I know that patent data is very popular in innovation economics, but it's measuring something different.
Yeah,
And
alors, in
it's
fact,
maybe not explaining creative destruction, and you have a time lag problem as well.
so in fact, to answer, in the missing growth paper, on measurement, we use employment share and payroll share and revenue share of entrants, continuers, and exiters. Okay, so not directly patent. Okay, and then we use we have two methods. That's the method I showed. There is another method that tries to get at the frequency and size of innovation, but by using data not so much on patents, but more on on the turnover rate, on the size, on the relationship between size and age of firms. You see what I mean? So you try to look at entry, exit, age of size of firms at different age, turnover measure of job turnover, firm turnover, and it's more like those data that we use to compute, to infer the frequency and size of innovations than direct patenting data. Some people use also patenting data. So we use both, but you're absolutely right. Patenting data, they have a lot of, what's good with them is that you can say an innovation is more cited, or is more general, or is cited by more fields. So it gives you, but it's true that if you can back up by other measures of innovation, that more directly to the firm's turnover and firm dynamics, that was good. So that's why also the Schumpeterian approach is very important, because it has firm dynamics built in. Other models by people I won't cite here don't have at all the firm dynamics, and I think they lose this other way to look at innovations.
Okay, there seem to be no more questions. I would like to finish this lecture. Let me thank you all for coming, and thank you, Philippe, for your nice presentation.
Thank you. That's superb. That's great. Good surprise.